Hey, welcome to another episode of what's this called again?
Dark Side of the Moon. Welcome to menopause.
Welcome to which show am I on? I've had so many. Welcome to another episode of Dark Side of the Moon. I'm Bella, and I'm a psychic medium.
And I'm Nancy. I'm the paranormal researcher. Yeah, Bella. So yeah,
Paranormal researcher.
6 times fast. And her cousin.
The cousin rolls off the tongue a lot
Right.
quicker.
Paranormal researcher. You have to really enunciate.
Yes, you do. Well, so on this episode, we've decided to delve into the folklore of vampires. And the one thing when I was doing research on this, because I was the lead researcher on this, it's funny because my name is also Bella.
Yeah,
I did not find Edward.
For Twilight. Are you team Edward or team Jacob?
I don't know. They both have their own merits.
I guess. One actually is living, the other one's actually
That's
dead.
one. So
And one doesn't want to suck your blood.
yeah,
It
that's
does.
another.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think it would probably be more team Jacob actually. I'm the Bella that went the other way. So anyways, yes, I did it on the vampire folklore. And the one thing that I found is that vampires and Dracula are two different things.
Really?
Yes,
They don't coincide?
they don't coincide. The concept of vampires being undead and inflicting harm actually originated in Eastern Europe, specifically in Bulgaria,
Okay.
over 1,000 years ago. So, and it was a widespread legend, and it was mostly really isolated among the Slavic people. Now, vampire actually translates, or I'm sure it's probably said differently in the way there. I'm sure it's probably called vampira. Vampira. But it's actually translates to ghost monster.
Ah,
That's what it actually translates. The Slavic vampires did not have a body. Did not have a body. They were just
what?
they were more like
Entities?
a poltergeist, really.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Or was that these entities, poltergeists, would go along and they would spread like disease, kind of like a rat would. And that was the folklore around that.
Like a plague.
Yeah, like a plague. It wasn't something like you could not get a bite from them and turn into a vampire. None of that.
Oh.
It was more, it's really like a nuisance, actually. That's what they were.
Is it a bug killer or rat killer?
Yeah, so that's what you needed. You need rat poisoning for the vampires. The vampire actually came into the Western history, and becoming like a fairy tale, very seductive and all this other stuff.
Right.
That started in 1686, 6 years prior to the Salem witch trials.
Okay.
And it was the German-speaking people of the Holy Roman Empire that when they gained control of Hungary.
Yeah.
They controlled also the Slavic population, and the imperial troops. They were the ones who learned about this folklore, the vampire, through the Slavic peasants during their occupation. So the soldiers basically carried it from Vienna to Berlin, and as they carried it, and then it went from there to Paris to London, and then from London to America. So every time it kind of moved around, the story changed a little and got added on.
Kind of like a game of telephone.
Pretty much. So it really traveled from the east to the west, and the vampire legend grew with new features. And the people in Bulgaria were like, "Where did this come from?"
Right.
Right?
Well, they wanted to make it interesting.
Yeah. So it went from it started off as the vampire being a ghost, and then all of a sudden it became to a risen corpse like guy that
The undead.
that
right?
would suck your blood. More so, what the one thing that they noticed that when it came to the West, people started putting some validity to it because they put some science behind the supernatural, which was kind of weird because of with the blood, the whole blood thing, which they never had that in Bulgaria, or like the vampire needed blood in order to carry on.
Eternal
Yeah.
life.
So they consider that, scientific.
That's scientific?
That was scientific.
Huh.
So, and then the Westerners were moving past the superstition of witchcraft, and they were decriminalizing it in Britain and into the colonies in 1735.
Right.
So the intellects at the time,
Intellects
when they were confronted with the vampire testimonies,
Yeah.
they conceived the vampirism disease. Rather than it being supernatural. So they had the intellects.
Where would the disease come from?
The disease was in the blood. So they got vampirism because the people got bitten, and then the disease. So they kind of took a little bit of what the ghost thing was, where it was like, the rat thing.
Yeah.
And they inflicted it, and they kind of came up with their own mismatched thing, which is really weird.
Yeah, that seemed weird.
Yeah, and that was like, and then in the 1700s, the human blood believed to possess medicinal qualities, and it was widely consumed as medicine throughout Europe.
Oh, you mean not from non-vampires?
From non-vampires. For some reason, the vampire legend started, and then the intellects decided that the blood of people also carried some medicinal purposes, which.
But back in the medieval times, they used to do like bloodlettings where they would like put leeches.
That's when you were like not good.
Blood.
But they also but in certain areas,
blood
also would give you blood offerings.
Yeah.
And that's where the vampirism disease started.
Congratulations. I'm assuming that our viewers could see that too.
Yeah, that was just weird.
I don't know if you did something with your fingers and like made that happen.
This made it happen? I don't know.
It was like, congratulations.
Yeah, so it was just like, and this happened in the 1700s. So they widely started consuming people's blood. And I don't know if it was a specific type of people's bloods, probably like everything else. But they're saying throughout all of the societies, especially in the Americas.
Yeah.
That's when they started. And today, a lot of the historians call that medicinal cannibalism. The blood was cheap and cost due to the common use of bloodletting as a physician's tool.
Right.
So, which is kind of weird. If they're bloodletting somebody because the person is not feeling well, then they're taking that blood and giving it to someone else as medicine.
Yeah. And then if it's not the right, they're consuming it. At least they're not putting it intravenously. Then you kind of kill it because you're doing different blood type. They didn't.
It's kind of weird. They're not blood typing back in the 1700s.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So imagine if they would have done it somehow, get it internally.
I don't know. Well, they were saying blood was believed to be the vessel of the human soul. And by imbibing,
I thought the eyes were the window to the soul.
Not in the 1700s. And by drinking the blood, it was basically you're drinking this person's life as well, which is again.
Well, see, maybe they're going with the biblical. You're at the body and blood of Christ.
I don't think so.
It's odd that there's a correlation towards.
Well, they were saying these are the intellects, right?
Yeah, intellects.
And this is in the Western area, not in the European.
I don't know why you were quoting Western. Western.
So basically, it was like human blood was prescribed for everything from epilepsy to failing eyesight in the 1700s.
Okay, where the hell were they getting the blood again?
Bloodletting.
Okay, so when the doctor would do a bloodletting to help somebody,
you're like, keep that. We're gonna use it though. So and so down the street can't see.
It's almost like blood transfusions, but just
I was looking at it too, and I'm just like,
that's kind of gross.
This doesn't make sense. So
no.
Some of the and this is already happening. So as they're starting to go along, they're creating this character, this supernatural character of Dracula. And that's where Dracula really came, because it was like they're taking portions of everything else.
Right.
So one of the popular myths of vampires is it rose because of the lack of knowledge in several of the scientific areas.
Right.
Such as stages in decomposing of the body, bad medical practices like burying people alive,
which
later managed to cloud out. Well, I have a story about that. My dad, remember telling me a story. He told me a story about 3 different funerals that he went to.
Yeah.
One, he said he was a kid. It scared the shit out of him, which would anybody.
Yeah.
The guy passed out, and the guy must have been passed out for a long time, and he didn't come to. So what they did was they started mourning him. They don't have at that time they didn't have embalming or anything. So basically they laid him out in the house on the bed. Then they took him from the bed. They actually built a coffin for him, because back then you had to build them.
But do you not realize they're not cold? Like,
I don't know.
Do you know what I mean? The basic signs of life,
and or the fact that his like chest is rising because he's still breathing.
This is kind of
I don't know. It was
but it happened quite a bit.
It was like, oh no, he passed out. we're getting the coffin going. Let's put some 2x4s together. Then he's in church and they're like, yeah, of course, like back then they didn't have like my dad's like there was no electricity, so everything's candlelit.
Right.
He goes in the middle of the night,
And
whatever time.
and everything's done within 24 hours
Yes.
or so.
So he goes, it was in the evening. He's thinking it's probably around like a little later, but he was young too. He goes, all of a sudden the guy popped out in the middle of a service, kind of like, what's going on?
Oh my God.
Yeah, scared the shit out of everybody. So I'm just like, well, that alone would make it look like he's a vampire. And then where my parents grew up, it was a small town, like our parents grew up.
Yeah.
I mean, they had rail grave diggers, and that whole thing where it was like the midnight shift, that was a real thing. Because I remember the grave, my dad said that everybody knew the grave digger. They were digging graves by hand. So it was such a small island, they would bury more than one casket in the same grave.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes. Or they would replace the casket once the
Once the body had decomposed, they would replace that. But they needed to bury another person, and that grave wasn't hard. So they were like, we can still fit into the coffin in there. So they I guess put it up and took it out, and when they opened up the coffin, the person they could tell the body had moved, was all like contorted,
right,
and there was scratch marks,
which means they were alive,
which means that they were buried alive.
Wow. I've heard of folklore, we're talking about burial a lot. Isn't there certain countries that used to put like tie a bell so they could bring
that was, I think,
from
England?
the ground?
Yeah, because it was like that whatever bell. Yeah, they started doing that because of that.
For that. So
yeah,
to hear that, they'd have to like jig as quickly.
Yeah, that's where the graveyard shift came in.
Yeah,
shift. Yeah, I'm sure they did take a graveyard shift.
Oh shit! You said shit. Oh, I didn't know.
I'm sure they did, but so yeah, so that's where some of all that, putting it together, makes up the whole undead thing.
Right. Okay.
So
undead.
And then
undead, we're quotation.
Undead.
Today's quotation day.
Yeah. And then there was other, people that had mental disease or mental problems, or they had disease they couldn't identify, and something they would pass it or whatever. Yeah. So all of that.
Well, if they had narcolepsy or something.
Yeah. And then there was also another thing which they didn't know about. They had people with rare blood disorders. And people who had the other thing is there is a such disease. It's called porphyria, which means the physical inability to survive in sunlight. That's an actual disease.
Oh wow! Oh, you see that even now, where kids have to stay inside.
Yeah, well, that's where the vampire thing came, right? You can't be in the sunlight. Right. Other than that, or Edward Sparkles.
Oh, see, yeah, Edward was fancy.
And then there's another disease such as hematopydicea.
Has something to do with the blood.
It's obviously a sexual thirst for blood, not just the thirst. Sexual thirst. What do you mean
sexual thirst?
I'm sure they get off on getting the blood.
Oh, maybe. Ew.
And then there's the hemerolopia, which is a fear of sunlight. So there were certain, diseases and certain mental issues and things that had it that also fed into this whole folklore.
Gotcha.
So the vampire of the West, therefore, was medically savvy, and it was a dead creature. It came to be believed it consumed blood to restore its own life. So the detail of the ghost monster, which is the actual vampire, that was like done, and then it became closer to the Dracula, which was first published in 1897.
Okay.
Which was a made-up fable. And
which most people you think would assume it's made up.
No, I don't know. But it kind of grew over, and as it moved throughout the world, it moved away from the vampire to Dracula, which is what, and then now we've got Twilight. And these are all common things that come in. These are all things that are made up from different authors and stuff like that make up, and they just take out different legends from here, different legends from there, and they've kind of created their own.
Did you ever read anything about what about Vlad the Impaler and all that stuff in Transylvania? Was there anything?
Vlad the Impaler actually was a real guy.
He was,
except that he didn't get bitten. They took this real guy and then meshed them with Dracula.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out why that made sense. I mean, he liked to impale
Yes, created by Bram Stoker or something.
Well, that's Dracula.
Yeah,
That's who made Dracula.
yeah.
That's
So
one of the Dracula.
he was the one who created that whole and took someone who was weird, real, and kind of like exaggerated stuff about him
Right,
too.
okay.
Because I mean, but yeah, that wasn't really. It's not a real thing. Like the vampire is not a real thing.
Well, I never assumed the undead vampire was a real thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, and then it was like it really got weird. Like they're like the person that doing
Got
it
even weirder.
well, because it's like, because it's like these are some of the things that contemporary stun a vampire. Like back in the olden days, back when I was a kid, this was the stuff that worked. All of a sudden, Twilight came out and everything went out the door.
Right. Oh, stake through the heart.
Well, the holy objects like a cross, garlic,
Holy water.
Holy water.
Garlic. Yeah, I never understood garlic. I know it has antibacterial properties. Like if you have a cold or something, eat some garlic. It'll clear up, any ailment.
Well, no, listen, and nobody wants to be around somebody that's eating garlic.
Oh, believe me, yeah, because
even the undead.
I've done that. I've eaten some like big old piece of garlic, and the people I was with wouldn't even go near me.
There you go.
They'd be like, I love you, but no.
So maybe they were a vampire. You got rid of them.
But garlic, that's true.
And then there's mirrors, which I completely forgot about that.
Oh yeah, where they can't see each other. They can't see not each other. They can't see themselves.
Sunlight, water.
Holy water.
Well, no, water itself, I guess.
Really? No, I never heard the water itself.
They cannot survive touching open water, such as an ocean or large lakes.
I didn't know that.
Well, I'm telling you. And oh yeah, and they also cannot come into your house without being invited.
Oh yeah, I remember that from the movies, right? That didn't happen in Twilight though.
They threw out the book.
Actually, I think Twilight was trying to tell you that this is actual vampires, all that stuff is the folklore.
Yes,
that's what they're trying to say.
Yeah. And some of the more exotic powers that the vampires some of them would have in folktales, they could fly, they could transform into a mist. Remember, they would take it. Animals like bat is usually the one that I always saw. They would transform into a bat.
Yeah.
They were magically persuasive. Like look into my eyes.
That's right. They could hypnotize you to do what they wanted, pretty much.
Well, kind of Twilight actually kind of had that same ability, right?
They had that seductive, like I could just make you do what I wanted by my smell, my touch,
and this ability I would want to have. The ability to change their size and their weight.
Wait, you can do that? Well, yeah, because they can make themselves big or small. Their size. Size of what? Like
today, you know what? Today I'm going to go to Red Lobster, so I'm going to let it out a little more.
And you know what? Today I feel like I want to be 6'4".
Yeah.
But maybe tomorrow I'll be 5'6".
You know what? I think I want to do a supermodel walk.
The problem with that is, you know how many clothes you'd have to have? Like you'd have to have different size clothing and different heights, everything.
Listen, I can turn myself into a mist. The drop of a hat.
What are we like? That's almost like the Incredible Hulk. How come he could transform himself into this big man, yet his pants ripped, but his waist was intact, like he was still wearing his jeans? How is that possible?
Yeah, I know his jeans went from a regular, like from pants to like knickers.
Yeah. But it was never naked. Somehow it would keep it intact.
No, but his shoes were done.
Yeah, shoes, shirt even.
yes, that was the first thing.
For some reason, his waistline expanded, but his pants went with him.
Maybe he was wearing jeggings.
I don't know. Maybe that's all you have to think of. No, I was wearing jeggings yesterday, and man, does that stuff snatch you right in? It does.
The Hulk was
snatched. Because I was wearing jeggings yesterday, it literally snatched me in like 2 sizes.
Okay, so we went from the undead to the Hulk in a second.
Well, because you're talking about they could change into different things. I'm like changing a wardrobe, but I want to figure out how the Hulk works.
So basically, my point in this.
Oh yeah, there's a point.
There's a point in
vampires.
Vampires.
What is the ultimate point?
The only my point is vampires. Dracula is actually a conception from an from an author. There is no such thing as much as we want to. There was no such thing with vampires with special powers and anything. And the actual vampire itself was more like ghost-like, which is where probably the mist thing comes into. They turn into mist because they would possess the body of the person that passed away within the first 40 days, which after that they were not able to possess them anymore. Which makes probably a lot of sense why they did certain things to bodies to preserve it and to make sure, when they did their burials there. And that was probably one of the things. And my thing is the vampire from them probably grew from people going into the grave because they've passed out and nobody's there that has the medical degree and can tell the person's still alive. So person being buried alive, or they're my dad told me plenty of stories where they were carrying the coffin to the guy's grave and the guy's kicking in the coffin. And then luckily, they had a few souls that actually were able to escape their own death.
I'm assuming their vital signs were very weak and they didn't know how to check for vital signs.
That's why a doctor. Like my dad said, who we had was the village priest.
In the corner.
He was a doctor. He was everything because there was no doctor in Small Village. I said to my dad, I'm like, did that freak out everybody when that guy stood up in his coffin? Sat up in his coffin in the middle of the square. My dad's like, oh yeah. He goes, we all screamed.
But a family must have been overjoyed.
Dropped the Bible like it was like a chaos.
I bet. But could you imagine the family? How joyous you would be?
Oh yeah.
That your loved one is alive. Like that's
I guess the guy's reaction was like, what the hell is going on here? That's what he said. Started swearing at church.
Oh my God.
Me too.
Oh yeah. Because you were like, what happened here? Did I get drunk one night? And then
he's like, man, just drunk one night. And the wife's already
he's gone.
He's
Let's
gone.
hurry up.
Start building that coffin. So yeah. So that's the story. Please, I'm sure my family's not the only one that's had some really weird stories about European and dying and being buried alive.
Yeah.
So let us know in the comments if you have any really crazy ass stories. I'd love to hear them.